Right, I think we'll get started then. Hopefully, some more people will join as we go through. So, just to introduce myself, my name's Ellis McCoy. I'm a regional sales manager here at Raytech. Today, we'll be going through the Illuminating Your Perimeter webinar. Um, Presentation should take roughly 25 to 30 minutes or so, and hopefully, you'll be able to glean some good information from me. Just to say thanks to everybody for joining to start off with as well. It's great to see. Well, it's an absolute privilege to be hosting this for you, and it's very nice to see some familiar names in the attendees list, which is it's always good to see. A little bit of housekeeping to start off with. So hopefully in your GoToWebinar user interface, you'll see a little questions and answers box. So as we go through the presentation, please feel free to post any questions that you might have. We won't go through them as they come in, but I'll wait until the very end, and then we'll have a few minutes kind of question answer time, and then yeah, hopefully I'll be able to answer everything on the spot. If not, then we can take it offline and answer afterwards. So yeah, we shall begin. So quickly, just to go through the agenda, we'll start off by looking at lighting, so why it's needed for perimeter fence lines, the types of lights that are available, why you choose one over the other, and how they can potentially complement each other, and so forth. We'll look at the quality and the distance of the light and how these two things affect each other. Network lighting and the different integrations that are available. And then we'll also go through the importance of lighting design. And then, as I say, we'll finish off with a Q&A. So hopefully there's some good questions, but hopefully not too hard ones. So why do you need lighting for perimeters? Fundamentally, the perimeter is the first line of defense. So typically a high security site is obviously going to use cameras to surround the perimeter. And then you may also deploy a number of other devices. So things such as motion detectors, fence sensors, PIR sensors, and so on. For the cameras to be effective, it's imperative that you have good lighting across the whole perimeter. Even if you light, say, 99% of the perimeter, that still means that you might be left with, a dark corner somewhere, or perhaps just light not overlapping with some of the cameras. And issues like this essentially kind of mean that the whole site could be at risk. If your perimeter is well protected and uses good lighting, it also may deter crime from the point of entry. A criminal trying to gain access is naturally going to look for a dark spot, so lighting 100% of your perimeter may deter this from happening. And lighting will also help cameras obtain good quality images, which can be used for prosecution purposes later on. Generally speaking, these perimeter systems are in place because we're trying to protect something behind the line. So using lighting to support access restriction, both to detect and deter crime, as well as prosecution purposes when crime does occur, ultimately the aim is to protect whatever it is that we've got behind that perimeter. So let's have a little look at the different types of light available and how they can complement each other. So first of all, we've got kind of infrared, which is the bread and butter of security installations. Primarily, we would, or commonly we use the 850 nanometers infrared wavelength, and I'd say to this day probably 80 to 90% of all the security lighting that we sell is 850 nanometers. We do have alternatives as well, such as in the 700 wavelength and also 940 nanometers. However, we kind of see these as being for more specialist. So 730 nanometers being more transport related, and 940 nanometers being what we would consider to be full covert infrared. But again, the problem with that is that cameras simply aren't as susceptible to that wavelength of light. So you often see a 40 to 50% drop off. So 850 nanometers really is that sweet spot of infrared. Obviously, it's zero light pollution. It's what we would consider to be semi-covert, so especially useful if it's used in a built-up area. And as there's no visible light, it means that it's non-intrusive to anything around it. It's ideal for capturing images covertly, and because it's invisible, it's not going to assist or alert any intruders. Uh, White light. So first and foremost, white light is to give cameras color images. Some perimeters may opt to use white light so that they can keep camera in day mode and capture color images 24/7. So using white light allows you to capture more information than using just infrared. As likely we're all aware, infrared's going to give you a black and white image, and white light will allow you to see additional information. So things like picking up the color of somebody's jacket, the color of their hair, etc. It just means that if you've got, say, man gods on site and you need to be able to give a very accurate description of an individual of interest, you're able to do so. It could also mean that later on, if you are prosecuting somebody, that you've got that additional information and kind of pick them out better in that sense. White light can also have multiple, or can be used for multiple uses. So in the sense that, if you're lighting on a vertical plane, that would be CCTV only. However, if you choose to illuminate on the horizontal plane, you could use that for both CCTV and general area lighting. At Raytech, we do all sorts of projects, but some of our kind of more prestigious ones for UK critical infrastructure companies or businesses like National Grid, for example, we need to illuminate a sterile zone at 10 lux. And the aim for that is obviously you're assisting the cameras by doing so. You're giving them more than sufficient requirement of lighting, but it's also going to provide you with enough light for man guards or patrols to be able to see what they're doing and safely navigate the perimeter fence lines. However, saying that, more often than not, white light's going to be used in conjunction with infrared. So kind of the way we might see it is that you've got your infrared looking through nighttime, and then once an alarm is detected, either via PIR, fence vibrations, analytics, etc., that could trigger alarm, which would in turn could automate the lighting to turn on, and again, act as a visual deterrent to warn off intruders. This could also be done manually, so it doesn't need to be automated. You might be using the infrared again to use to look at nighttime, and then if someone were to approach the fence line, you could trigger the white light easily from the like the user interface of the IP products to allow you to identify if that person is known to you or if it is in fact an intruder. White light does have some limitations though. A CCTV camera, simply speaking, is just more receptive to the IR part of the spectrum. So that means you're going to achieve further distances using infrared. And just to kind of reinforce that, if we're talking kind of like for like in terms of power, so like a 50-watt infrared illuminator is just always going to be more powerful and go further than a 50-watt white light illuminator. So that does need to be considered too when you're planning your like the distances between columns, for example. So yeah, when you're specifying the distances based on what lighting you're going to use, light pollution can also be a problem, certainly in built-up areas. If it is an area that is built up, and you have like a really bright white light pointing towards someone's property, yeah, as I say, it's going to be quite intrusive. And a project that always sticks up in my head is for a silo facility down in Gosport that we're working on, and essentially the entire fence line was lined with residential streets, literally direct opposite the road. And so obviously for something like that, infrared just had to be the predominant use case. Obviously in certain areas white light was required, but yeah, it needed to be as covert as possible. Another important point that you need to think about is where you're actually placing the light. So as we've kind of said, you'd expect a bright white light to act as a deterrent to an intruder, but you could kind of spin it in a couple of different ways. So if you've got light everywhere 24/7, that light could potentially be used by the intruder literally just to see where they're going. It could almost be used as an assistance. And the other thing as well is if you've got somewhere that's lit up all the time, it kind of supports the thought that maybe there is something worthwhile behind that perimeter that an intruder might want to be looking at. So it's kind of like, I guess the way we see it is that the most common use of is white light preferred as a deterrent. And what we find though is that with all this technology available to identify people, often the site or the user don't really want to go through the legal process of prosecuting. So using it as a deterrent purely to scare some people off is often a very popular choice for the white light products. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about the hybrid illuminators, which can be a great all-in-one solution as they combine infrared and white light together in a single lamp panel. A good quality hybrid illuminator is arguably the perfect solution for a perimeter surveillance application. Critically though, you really need to check what you're getting. So you need to make sure that you're getting the same power and distance from a hybrid lamp as you would from two dedicated lamp panels. So like an infrared, individual infrared panel and an individual white light panel. And this is the approach that we take here at Raytech as well. So the important thing is to ensure that you're not trading off for a loss of power for that additional functionality of having it all in one. So you always need to check the spec that they're essentially equivalent to the dedicated white light and infrared products. With regards to price, you can expect to pay pretty much half of what you would for two dedicated illuminators as well. Plus, you're only using one cable too, so it's a lot more efficient in terms of installation and effectively does the same job. And again, as I was saying, kind of for quite a lot of the critical infrastructure projects, they would have historically used our Raymax products and Raylux products in conjunction, whereas nowadays you could just swap say like a 4-panel setup for a single hybrid illuminator, and obviously that's a lot more efficient for you to do. Again, so this would allow you to have the infrared controlled via photocell. So the infrared would come on at nighttime and give your cameras monochrome all through the night. And then you could have a device trigger the white light portion of the product, or you could have it automated. So quality and distance of light and how they're going to affect each other. So let's weigh them both up. We've touched on the perimeter fence lines covering large areas and it being imperative that the whole fence line needs to be protected. The entire area must be covered or it could jeopardize the whole site. When specifying lighting, we're going to normally recommend that the light goes further than the cameras need to, so greater than the distance between the cameras. So if your cameras are, say, like 50 meters apart, we're probably going to specify maybe 60 or 70 meters for the lighting. And the aim of this is so that you've got no dead areas underneath the cameras, because obviously if you think you've got a lamp mounted at 4 meters, you're often going to have like a small pocket underneath that column that's not going to be hit from that specific illuminator. And so what you want is you want the lamp behind it to essentially light that up, so that area isn't being missed off essentially. You could also use fewer cameras. For example, one long distance illuminator and a long distance camera could result in less columns, less cabling, and obviously less cost. So to give you an idea of how far we could go, so one of the Raytech Vario 2 illuminators can go up to 500 meters at a 10-degree spot. However, you kind of have to consider the quality of the images at these distances, and ultimately that's also going to link into what you want out of this system. If you're using the example of the 500-meter illuminator and somebody comes on scene at say 30 meters, they're probably going to be a little bit overexposed. But then if somebody comes on at 500 meters, there's going to be a lot less light actually hitting them. So you're going to get very different images at different points. So while you could have a setup like this, perhaps it's going to be more for the detection as opposed to identification. So these factors really need to be considered depending on what you want the light or the system to be doing. So yeah, we can go obviously very far, but sometimes it's more optimal to use a little bit less to get a little bit more uniformity. And this again, I'm saying it kind of depends on your requirements. So if you want identification, then this might be the way forward. So uniform light is because it's essential if you want to be able to prosecute as well as detect, because you're going to reduce the overall likelihood of false alarms, and because you've got a uniform light with a kind of a lower peak and ambient light level being equal, it means that you're going to significantly reduce the amount or increase the chance that you're going to get a good image of an individual on site. So understanding distances, and this is a super important slide that I always like to link into my presentations. So essentially we're trying to understand kind of like distances and how manufacturers claim their distances. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that there aren't any standards when it comes to infrared light. So what this means is that manufacturers are essentially just pretty much free to put whatever it is that they want on their data sheets. An example might be, like Raytech produces a 25-watt infrared product, and we state that that product is going to give us 100 meters or give you 100 meters of distance. A different manufacturer could have an identical lamp, but they could just put 120 meters on. And realistically, it's super difficult for anybody to really ascertain what that really means. Like, how much light is that actually giving you, and what results are you going to get from that? So at Raytech, we decided to publish a guarantee. So essentially, all of our lamps will deliver a minimum light level at the specified max distances within our data sheets. So just kind of to be completely open, for infrared, it's 0.35 microwatts per square centimeter, and for white light, it's 3 lux. So to kind of give a benchmark to you, at 2 lux, probably the majority of cameras are going to get a good quality picture, and then same 0.35 microwatts per square centimeter is going to be giving most cameras, depending on kind of chip size, lens, etc., pretty good picture. One of the ways that I like to try and describe this is because it's very difficult to look at those numbers and visualize it. So I always refer to the British standards for general area lighting, and one of the points is that for pedestrian footpaths in a park is 5 lux average. And if you try and think to yourself, when you've been walking at night through a park and it's very, very dimly lit, but you can see where you're going, that's 5 lux average. So to the human eye, 5 lux isn't a huge amount, but obviously cameras and lenses are a lot more sensitive to light than the human eye is. And so that 3 lux or 2 lux, it's really not very bright at all, but obviously it's good enough for a camera to get a good image. At Raytech, we've also created the industry first surveillance lighting standard called POWERS. What this stands for is peak power, overall power, width and angle, environmental reliability, specification, and the lamp features. And basically, this is a resource that we try to come up with to level the playing field essentially, and also help customers so that when they're writing lighting into a tender, it doesn't necessarily need to mention Raytech, but by using these 6 points, you can be absolutely assured that the performance spec that you're putting in there is going to achieve what you actually need out of that solution. And so Powers is definitely something that I would recommend having a look at, and you can find it on our website. So we used the 500-meter example earlier on, and here it is in action. So these images were captured using a Vario 2 I16-1 with a 10-degree lens, so obviously very narrow beam angle. As you can see, we had to do this on a small airport runway. Believe it or not, it can be quite difficult to find a facility with power and quite such massive distances. And as you can see on the image on the left there, you can see that tiny little kind of like dot dead center. And then on the image on the right, that's us zooming in, and you can see, well, you can actually see myself there, myself, and I think it was my colleague Ben, and my little closer at the time. And again, this kind of goes back to what I was mentioning before. So obviously at this level of light, you know, you're not, and this distance, you're not going to be getting identification, but you are going to be able to get very clear detection. And although, you know, you're not going to get faces on there, you can see the lettering on the plane, etc. So you are getting good level of detail. And this is all due to that minimum light level that we mentioned previously. So that 0.35 microwatts per square centimeter. I would also completely aside from the fact that this was 3 a.m. pre-IFSEC, and yeah, it was on a work night too, so not the most enjoyable, but just to prove that we're doing the hard graft sphere to get this testing. And also this was in conjunction with an Axis Q Series PTZ as well, just so you have the full reference on how we're able to achieve this. The second thing that you need to think about is when using camera analytics as part of your perimeter solution, because that means that you have a completely different set of requirements when specifying lighting. It'll depend obviously on what kind of analytics are being used, but you may need much more light than you would normally as standard. Um, I guess it's you know, simple to say, but fundamentally, no light means no analytics. And if you have low light, it could mean that the analytics struggle to classify, or what it does classify, it might be at a very low confidence. Similarly, if you've got a noisy image due to a lack of light, that might mean that you're getting a lot of false positives, because noise obviously means movement on the screen, which the analytics can falsely identify. This is essentially the case when the analytics are being trained to detect small objects. So just emphasizing again, it's really important to consider the use of dedicated lighting, especially so when you're using analytics. And again, a good example we had of this is when we were down at Bentley Motors in the UK. So it was quite an interesting site for where they stored all of their prototype vehicles, basically. Very interesting when I was trying to drive through them, thinking if I knocked one, it probably was the same price as my house. But essentially what they had was a degree of ambient lighting on scene, but it just wasn't giving enough light for the analytics to give high accuracy levels. And so we came up, we installed, it was actually the i16s that we discussed earlier. And the end result was, because of the contrast that we were able to provide between the individual and the background, we were getting higher accuracy levels during nighttime than they were during the daytime. So obviously Bentley Motors were very happy with the solution, and it was a great success. The funny thing about that one as well is that they weren't really worried about intruders causing any damage. They were actually worried about espionage, because obviously with it being all the prototype vehicles, they didn't want people coming in and taking photos of the cars. So it was yeah, very cool, very interesting one to be involved with. So a couple of slides ago, I talked about the testing we did on the runway. Narrow angles are going to achieve greater distances. However, it's also important to consider the use of wide angles as well. You're going to need a wide angle of illumination for things like the corners of a perimeter, especially if it's a sharp corner. Gatehouses as well, more often than not, gatehouses have their own specific specification or section of a tender totally dedicated to them, often because, you know, they need a lot higher levels of lighting. But essentially, you know, we've all, well, the majority of us have probably been there when we've been on site, and no matter how many photos we take or how, you know, I guess precise we are with getting the plan, there's always that nook or cranny that you miss, and having the ability to change angles is super important, because it just gives you a little bit more flexibility on site. And this is certainly the case on critical infrastructure sites as well, where you're looking to track any person entering or leaving a site, and like I say, obstacle or problem areas that might be things where not necessarily picked up, or plans might be missed on a site survey, etc. So the way we can get around this specifically is via interchangeable lenses. So and this is an important feature for you to look out for, essentially, when you're looking at your infrared or white light products. So an interchangeable lens will allow you to easily change the angle to match the field of view of the camera lens, which we just talked about how important it is to get that right. On the Raytec example, we can see here, the product doesn't have a single moving part in it, which completely reduces the chance of failure. One product can cover 10 to 120 degrees, so very narrow spotlight all the way up to a floodlight just from the single panel. And this means it can be used in several areas of the site. So for example, if you're installing on a perimeter and there's corners, as I say, that you didn't anticipate, that little nook and cranny that you didn't think of, the ability to just quickly change the angle of the lamp can just, well, obviously helps the installers massively. From a storage aspect as well, if installers or distributors, etc., have these lamps in stock, the idea that they can be very flexible in terms of what situations they go in is an absolutely massive bonus. Another important feature to consider is hotspot reduction technology. So this feature will guarantee even illumination across the scene. And essentially, this is our fancy way of talking about the lenses that we use within the lamps and how they dissipate the light across, as I say, evenly. We also use elliptical beam patterns, which means that we're not firing light up into the sky where it'd be wasted. And simply it means that you're not going to get overexposure on the foreground as well. So if we look at the image on the left there, most likely it's a circular beam and it's providing an influx of light kind of at the foreground of the image, which is causing that exposure. And essentially all that happens here is that the cameras end up having to work harder. So it means that if you're zooming into certain locations or you're trying to see people in the darker and lighter areas, you're very likely to end up losing information, and ultimately that could cost you severely later on down the line. So network lighting. Let's have a little look at the fully IP addressable range of products. So firstly, hardware integration. Modern perimeter surveillance systems often consist of several integrated devices which are intended to work together. Typically, these are going to include IP cameras, which is kind of the bread and butter of every perimeter fence line, which might be working alongside analytics as well, as we discussed earlier. Then you might be having or installing PIR motion detectors, sensors, or something like a laser detector. A laser detector being similar to a PIR, but can detect movement in certain zones and could potentially tell a PTZ to look in a certain spot, for example. Next line of defense is maybe something like a fiber optic fence panel. So this would essentially detect movement or vibration on the perimeter fence. And then depending on the system use, it could give a warning, or again, much in the similar sense as the PIR, it could direct attention to a certain location depending on the type of product that you've got. And finally, last but not least, the IP illuminators. So for many years now, lighting was seen as kind of essentially a little bit of an add-on accessory, I guess, and something that would simply turn on at nighttime and then turn off during the day. However, the network capability of modern illuminators allow them to be integrated as part of the full system, and are now seen as an essential element of the full solution, which enhances and complements the other devices day and night. So let's say, for example, camera analytics could be telling white light illuminators to turn on in certain zones, or PIR, or the fence could be telling the light to trigger as a deterrent. Actually, I'm full of examples, but another nice one that we worked on, possibly, I think it was a couple of years ago. It's hard to remember with the COVID time dilation that's occurred, but it was for a whiskey storage site up in Scotland, and wasn't quite just perimeter fence line, but their application was a really interesting one. So they wanted white light to act as a deterrent. So if somebody comes on scene, it would obviously trigger and provide the cameras with color images, hopefully deter and scare away people. But they also wanted like a secondary use, which was if they have people driving up and down the vast array of storage cells, as they call them, so like the blocks with all the whiskey caskets in. They wanted to be able to trigger the lights based on movement detection and use that as general area lighting as well. So it was just really intelligent use. So you've got a massive, great big site with tons of lighting, and historically they would just have all of that on 24/7, which obviously is a massive waste of time. And as we said before, you know, it's not necessarily actually even the safest thing. Having a site that can be seen from the moon. And so by using the intelligent lighting, they're able to get a more energy efficient system, but also actually safer overall for both the people working there and, you know, in terms of the security aspect as well. The only sad thing about that site visit was that there were no whiskey samples to be had, which is a damn shame. Anyway, I digress. Um, we also need to look at software integrations. So typically, obviously, you guys as specifiers, you're going to be choosing a VMS system to manage all the devices which make up the security system. And as you're all well aware, there's several providers on the market offering VMS solutions like Milestone, Axis, Avigilon, Wavestore, Genetec, etc., etc. And it's important to note that the majority of these providers offer plugins for the lighting. So that means that there's no need for a license, or at most there may be a very small cost. But you should always check with the manufacturer of your light or whatever device you're looking to integrate within the system, as well as the VMS provider themselves, to make sure that everything can work nicely together. And in terms of extra cost for the lighting as part of the system, though, we can say it's very, very limited if we do go that route. What's more, installing your light will ultimately allow your system to become more intelligent. As I was saying before, you know, you can have really sophisticated systems. So, you know, we've talked about like the hybrid system where you've got infrareds giving you monochrome at nighttime, and then white light being able to automatically be triggered or manually triggered. So, one example is the Milestone plugin that we've got, where you can have push buttons on your main screen that will allow somebody to manually trigger lights. But another example could be, you know, if we're talking about that the I-16 going 500 meters, and obviously I mentioned a lamp that's putting out that amount of power. If, at 500 meters, it could look great. At 30 meters, you're probably going to get a degree of overexposure. So maybe like an intelligent use of that light could be that you've got, you know, cross-line detection or box detection, which would send a control to or a trigger to the lamp to turn down to certain levels. So if somebody is at 250 meters, maybe you turn the lamp down to you know 70%. If somebody's at 30 meters, you turn it down to 50%, something like that. And that way you can have something that's pumping out a massive amount of power, but actually you're able to taper that and make it very specific to that specific, like that particular scenario that could be occurring. So we've got a little video here. Hopefully this works. It might be a little bit loud, so you might want to adjust your headset just in case it does. It's about 1.5 minutes, so I'll just play this for you. So very dramatic there, but I do think it shows off the capabilities and how like the real world example of how that could work shows it off pretty well. So finally, we'll look at lighting design and what we can do there for you. So why is lighting design important? Fundamentally, it's going to guarantee that we're able to achieve the specified light levels across the site. So at Raytech, every single one of our white light illuminators has been independently tested to extract the photometric data. We can then use that data to build or recreate the site and put in lighting as and where required to essentially, as I say, make sure that we're able to 100% be sure that we're giving you what you need, and ultimately it makes sure that there's no surprises at commissioning. Um, I actually always promote this, from a consultant standpoint, but also as a installer standpoint, because it's just a great kind of document to be able to show people exactly what they're going to get at the end of the day. So there's two main methods of design that we can do. So 2D design's great for plotting individual lamps and showing the direction of them. If you're to illuminate for multi-purpose, for example, on a horizontal plane, like I mentioned earlier, we could also do things like adding contour lines. So say if you've got a certain steriles only want to achieve 7 lux, we could put a contour line on the outside and the inside. That would mean that the space within the sterile zone is essentially guaranteed to have that exact lighting level. And then on the right there, you've got a 3D design. This one's kind of, I guess, just the prettier way of doing things. So it's great to show a client exactly what they're going to get before even a single unit has been purchased. And while we can do something like you can see there, where it's very much top-down approach, we can also do like 3D walkthroughs and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, it's great for commercial customers, but also great for like private customers as well. Here we have another example, which is a tank farm design, and you might be wondering why it's so dark inside, and we've kind of done this on purpose to demonstrate the harsh cutoff. So for this requirement on the outside of the fence, the client wanted a certain width at a certain light level, and using the lighting design, we could show how we could guarantee this. Remember, we were talking about the availability of multiple beam angles earlier. This means that there's no wasted light, and we're only targeting the areas that is needed. This is always one of this is kind of like a major benefit of the lenses as well. So like if a manufacturer advertises tens or thousands of lumen output, but only 50% of those are useful lumens, i.e. going where they need to be, the claim figure is kind of pointless. So the nice thing about our products is we state the lumens, and because of the beam angles that we can provide, you kind of sure that you're actually going to be using 100% of that lamp itself. So just to summarize everything that we've talked about, hopefully I've made absolutely clear how critical it is to the performance of the overall system that lighting is. We've looked at the different lights available, so infrared, white light, and hybrid, and the benefits of how the lighting can be integrated with the other devices. And finally, kind of had a quick look at the lighting design support tools that are available, which I would absolutely recommend you all to take full advantage of. And that is it. So hopefully there's some questions, and we'll go through those now. Um, so got a question here, which is to ask, when would we recommend 940 nanometers? So 940 nanometers, as I say, it's very much a case of that it's a special, or we consider it to be more specialist. So for example, train line applications where the red glow of an illuminator would be considered to be a a hazard warning light or something like that. Um, those kind of applications absolutely requires 940 nanometers. You could potentially use 940 for a security fence line, but you have to consider how much more light is required in order to achieve the full distances that you need. So Liam's asked, is the webinar being recorded? Yes, it is recorded, and it'll be available later on. So Warren's asked, as an organization, we're often asked to use lighting design criteria for both BS 5489 to 2013 and secured by design lighting guidance. This type of requirement expands beyond just the surveillance lighting. Do Raytech products ever get used for general area lighting that incorporates CPD principles or is restricted to support the camera performance? Yes, absolutely. We get involved with the general area lighting side of things all the time. In fact, we have. So while the various products that I've hinted towards throughout the presentation there, we've also got a whole series of kind of more street lighting-esque products. And often as the case is when we're required to do more of a general area lighting requirement, they fit in a little bit better than the Vario products. So essentially, I guess the easy way to answer this is that we would look to do you a design, and we've got a vast range of products that would be able to fit into to the specific application and do as required. So Emiliano, white lights are starting to be used for with AI technology because the cameras with color is performing better than a black and white scene. Do you think it's possible to power the illuminator with low power, like 12 volt max 3 watt external input? Which distance is possible to achieve with this power? We don't have a product that's 3 watt max. We do, however, have the little W2 lamps, which are off the top of my head 8 watts or something. So probably wouldn't be able to, or in that specific example, we wouldn't be able to deliver a 3 watt lamp. But if we can increase the power, then absolutely, yeah, we can do something like that. How can we suggest illuminating to basic video surveillance installation? Again, so the most important thing is distance and angle. So whenever a customer gets in touch and asking for infrared or white light, we look at distance and angle. And much as I said in the presentation, the whole idea is to match the angle of the light to that of your camera. That's really the most important thing that you need to think about when you're specifying the correct product for the job. Of course, it goes without saying that if you need a hand with anything like that, give us a shout and we're more than happy to help. So many cameras have built-in infrared. Would you advise built-in or separate infrared for CCTV applications? I guess as an external lighting manufacturer, it goes without saying that we would recommend external. There's a few different reasons for this though. So first of all, performance-wise, you're going to have a steeper drop-off over time with integrated infrared. If you look at how our products are built, you'd see that like 70% of the lamp itself is heat sink, and that's because LEDs they create a lot of heat, but they need to dissipate that in order to maintain their performance over time. So overall, you'd get a a much more powerful lamp by going external. It would last a lot longer. But then there's also other things as well. So spiders is the classic example. So one of our general recommendations is that you would mount your lamp about a meter away from your camera, depending on the type of camera that you have. And the reason for this is purely so that you know, that heat source, which is the lamp, that's attracting insects and everything, and that means that your camera isn't attracting those insects. If you've got integrated infrared, the heat, which is the LEDs, is going to attract all those insects. It's going to spoil your images, and especially if it's a remote site, it's going to obviously lead you to having to carry out more maintenance to clean them, etc. How does the software connect with an AI camera? So we have various different integrations with both VMS and cameras. So I had mentioned a few, but the likes of Axis of Vigilon, Milestone, Genetec, Wavestore, etc., etc. We all have specific software plugins that will link into those softwares. However, we also have the ability to use HTTP control as well. So essentially, any device that can send a HTTP string command can work in conjunction with our lighting, which is super flexible because that covers a vast array of products out there. And even then, you know, if it's not possible, then you could always use a hard wire connection, but just use the IP interface on an IP product, so that the lamp knows what to do upon activation via that hardwire connection, and you can get a lot of the same functionality out of it. Yeah, okay, so Ashik, a good question actually. So regarding the hybrid light, how do you manage the different angles of light? For example, infrared, you might need to look along the fence, and the white light, you might need to look at 90 degrees to the fence. That's actually a super good question. So with our single panel lamps, that's maybe the only drawback, is that you'd have to have the same field of view set for the infrared and the white light. But for example, if you've got infrared going along the fence line and you're wanting a white light lamp that's 90 degrees of the fence, you're actually probably looking at having different products anyway, and because they're very different sort of requirements. So in that circumstance, it might be that you use an infrared lamp for your cameras, but then use one of the street light style products to give you that big spread of light on the horizontal plane. And so I probably see that specific requirement is actually not necessarily directly linked to the hybrid products. I'd go with kind of a split solution, and I think that would definitely give you the best bang for your buck. Liam's asked again, so are there any CCTV or motion sensors that integrate better with others, better than others with your products? So I mean, Raytech is part of the Optex group, so I would get a slap on the wrist if I didn't give them a good call out. Obviously, we work very well with them, but ultimately, no. Kind of as I mentioned before, any product that will integrate with like one of the VMSs that we do, or has the ability to send HTTP string commands, or even just has a hardwire input, can work directly with our lamps. So we're essentially non-biased in that respect. We can work with most manufacturers of, or I'd say probably all manufacturers of PIR products, as long as it's a good quality. Ashik's asked again, so optimal install position of lighting with respect to the camera position, above or below? So yeah, a classic question again. So our general guidance is 1 meter away from the camera, and this is irrespective of direction. It could be above, below, side to side, depending on if you're mounting on a column or a wall, for example. Again, it's kind of to avoid that aspect of insects, etc. But also, if you're using something like a dome camera and you're mounting too closely, then you get that classic halo effect, which obviously just completely distorts your image and is a massive detriment. So I think you can probably be a little bit more lax if you're using, like a box camera or a camera that's in a weatherproof housing where you've got a shield, etc. That's probably gives you a little bit more flexibility to do what you want. But if you're using a domed camera, then absolutely, I'd recommend about 1 meter away. I think that's the best case scenario. Another great question. So, have you considered using integrated solar power to power the infrared lights? Yes, absolutely, actually. So, not too long ago, oh God, not too long ago, probably 6 years ago, we actually did a solar powered light. Now, the thing about that is that solar power panels themselves are a very specific technology, and also it's being developed at a vast rate of knots. Um, it's not our speciality. So what we say is that our lamps are solar power enabled. So most of the infrared and white light products are 12 to 24 volts AC/DC, which would mean that you'd be able to plug them directly into a battery. And so while we don't ourselves provide the solar panels to power the products, you would be able to go to a solar panel specialist, get a product from them, get your battery set up, and they would work absolutely fine with our Vario products. Is the connection between the illuminators and VMS encrypted for not being hacked? Yes, yeah, it's all absolutely safe. And I think that is it for now. So leave it a couple more minutes. If there's any more questions, feel free to give me a shout. If not, thank you all again for attending. I've gone a little bit over our time schedule, but hopefully you've all found that very much of interest. So thank you everyone for joining. Ashik says, give a shout out to Peter Hume, one asset to Raytech. Yes, I would absolutely agree. He is, to use his words, a star and a scallop. And yeah, we're very pleased to have him. Right, I will end it there for everybody. So thank you all for attending again, and hopefully speak to you soon. Thanks, guys. Bye bye.